Hello, thanks for checking out this video. Today I'm going to give my review and thoughts on Neal Stephenson's Anathem. This is the monster book that I finally finished last week, and I feel like if I don't talk about it now, I'm going to forget everything because it was just so heavy with theories and cool stuff that I just really want to talk about it and at least get my thoughts on paper/video and what the heck I just read and what I went through. So to talk briefly about how I got into Neal Stephenson in general was, of course, browsing Reddit for the recommendations of authors to check out. I was in the mood for a sci-fi book. Neal Stephenson came up many times, in particular, kind of the classics like Cryptonomicon and Snow Crash came up. I didn't see those available at the local library, and I didn't have an Audible credit at the moment to spend on. But what was available from the good old New York Public Library was Anathem. So reading the description of this, it sounded intriguing enough. The author came highly recommended, and I figured I'd just jump into it. And with that, the caveat being that it does take so long to actually get going. You know, looking at the length of the audiobook at, I think it was 35 hours, I know it's, oh man, this is going to be this is going to be like a Sanderson 40-hour epic. And it is an epic, and there is so much that Stephenson goes into. But the caveat is that nothing really happens in like the first 3 or 4 hours of the audiobooks. It's probably like the first 100 or 200 pages. The plot really doesn't advance. It's just so much world building. And I recently read some of the Wheel of Time. I'm waiting for my next hold to come in for the next in the series. But the first 3 books, the Wheel of Time, also have this slower pace. So maybe that helped as a fortitude conditioning that I was, okay, I'm just going to enjoy it for the journey. And that's how I approached going into Anathem was, okay, I'm just going to enjoy the journey, not get hung up too much on the length, even though, I do like the plot to advance a little bit. And I'm glad I kind of just stuck through it and just let it happen without so many expectations and just enjoy the story. And I know this probably isn't going to be for everyone. It's really world building, really slow. And Stephenson just throws in all these terms as he's building this world. And all these terms and how he describes the life in this mathic world is what hooked me, because there's hints that the world he's describing is a version of Earth, or it's Earth in the past or Earth in the future, that there's enough similarities that you can get a grasp of what's going on, but you're still confused when he describes the way something works, that, oh, that's kind of like an iPhone, or, oh, that's kind of like this device that they're using, and, oh, that's a TV, even though they call it something totally different. But you can grasp at these concepts. So this grounded in reality but still fantasy make this, okay, it's probably a sci-fi fantasy now that I'm talking about it, and not a pure sci-fi, even though science and math is a huge part of this. But this extrapolation to be this kind of fantastical and semi-grounded in reality makes it that fantasy elements. Now there's magic. It's all, well, kind of magic, but science-based magic, which is what all good sci-fi is, that it's more of a rules-based science that lets the magic happen. But in this world, you're introduced to this mathic world. So it's the idea that monks, like in our world, also exist in their own secular, or the secular world is the outside world. Then there's the mathic world, where they just devote themselves to science and math. And they interestingly close themselves off for a number of years, only to reemerge at set number of gates, and the doors open at 10 years, 100 years, and 1,000 years. And what this does, it establishes a class of thinkers that devote so much time to developing just their theories in their own mathic world, and that they're outside of time and outside of the advancements in the secular, aka the real world. So they're not influenced by the latest slang or the latest fashion. So we see that as we're introduced through our character's eyes. Frau Erasmus, who is amazing. I love Erasmus Raz. It's such a great character. that we're introduced to the outside world, the secular world, through his eyes, and as he's emerging, and we're also introduced to the other sects that he doesn't belong to through the lens of his own, that he's aware of how the other sects work, that the hundreders and thousanders, how they're more revered and kind of like the hierarchy because they're so much more devoted to philosophy. And that's the other thing that may or may not turn off people, you like it or not, is the philosophical element, that there's a lot of debating that goes on, that the monks argue over like a debate club kind of argument where they're arguing their points. And the early example is when they argue the existence of a flying dragon and is it real because you didn't see it, and or that it could be real. And Stephenson sets up these ideas. He introduces like the seed early and becomes such a larger concept later. And that's kind of what the whole book is about, is kind of this, of course, this is spoilers, but the Halayan theoric world, which is there a world at all of concepts, and do concepts like math exist in their own kind of dimension? It's really weird to explain, but it makes sense in the book, and it's kept me thinking and kept me theorizing about how the world can evolve into separate worlds of concepts and reality. And that's what Stephenson plays through a lot in the book, through the slow burn of introducing the characters and introducing the larger plot points that start advancing the story almost at the halfway point. So you're almost 15, 20 hours in, and you're starting to get hints of this larger plot that eventually starts slowly moving the story along. And we're slowly uncovering more of the plot, the action kind of oriented plot. But this is definitely a book for someone that likes the more slow burn, theoretical, philosophical exploration of science fiction and fantasy, because that's what a largest chunk of the book is about, exploring these concepts. And through the eyes of our honestly lovable characters like Erasmus and Frau Orlo, we're introduced to these concepts and theories of what a possible future and the extrapolation of going into thought about theories and math could look like for society and the implications on that. And now I'll just pause for a second just because I want to talk about the spoilers so much. And this is the point to turn off. If you don't want to be spoiled, it is super interesting and it's super exciting. I loved the concept. So here it is now of the geometers and the cousins. And it's just mind-blowing kind of the ideas that Stephenson had to develop this world. So in a nutshell, at least how I understood it, so please comment and correct me, is that the cousins are from an alternate version of reality because they develop time travel. And then in order to get around the grandfather paradox, which is going back in time and killing your own grandfather, therefore causing you not to exist, so then you could never have gone back in the first place. It's the paradox that it creates kind of a loop that could have never happened. So in order to solve this loop, what nature does, and it just makes sense, is that basically the timeline branches. So if you think of course, Marvel Cinematic Universe of the branching sacred timeline. So every time the cousins / geometers go back in time to explore an alternate past and kind of fix something, instead of affecting the future of that timeline, the timeline branches. So now they're on another timeline. And again, it does kind of mess with your head like all time travel should and multiverse should, is who are the originals and what timeline are we on? And like the Mathic world and Erasmus, are they on a different timeline? And yeah, it just talk about it, it kind of jumbles my head, but that's kind of the concept of this branching timeline. And what the ship that eventually Erasmus and Orlo discover is this ship coming to their world through their time travel, multi-dimensional traveling. And they're basically looking to, exploit the resources of the planet, add it to their growing city, state, nation ship, because the ship is an amalgamation of other realities. If I'm understanding that correctly, that there's 4 different basically realities represented on this ship. So it's a ship of nations. And that's kind of the twist at the ending, I think, was that they're not invaders. That yes, they're invaders trying to survive, but that's just it. They're humans, and they have really human qualities who are just trying to get resources by destroying other realities, I guess, because they don't really see the realities as the true reality because they're on branch timelines. But they're just trying to advance their species in this generational ship because the species are already different hierarchies of people that have been on the ship, and they've assimilated some from different realities, but not others. So it's really interesting to even think about those ideas. And then, of course, at the end, we're kind of, the novel does speed up. So it is very theoretical, 90% of the time, but the ending does kind of steamroll, and there's a big mission to take on the ship. So things finally do come to a head, and there is a lot of action in that last maybe 20% of the book where, the plot actually happens. And that left me with a lot of questions as well. The most, obvious one, if you've read this yourself, is Frau Jad, who is the Thousander, who seems to have developed multidimensional abilities. And this is a concept I found super interesting, and it doesn't make sense to the very end. So this is definitely a law spoiler territory. Was that through the different sacks which were introduced, throughout the book, that the Mathic world, these monks are sacked by the secular world when they kind of invent contraptions and devices that become too dangerous. So the regular world kind of goes in, destroys them. But what we're told through the end, a couple technologies are grandfathered in and allowed to persist through the next kind of iteration of the Mathic world. And then what the kind of spoiler is each time this devices or, their inventions, I think the first one was like a nanotechnology and super particles, as certain ones are allowed to, continue over the centuries, but they get more abstracted. And if I'm understanding the ending correctly, by the third sack, they no longer have devices. The inventions have left the physical realm. So that's what Frau Jad uses. He uses like an invention that's a a device to access these realities. I think he's doing, because he sort of, it's very confusing at the end where we jump across a couple different storylines of things that could happen with Frau Jad and Erasmus as they visit the cousins. But then there's another timeline where it didn't happen, but yet some people understand that it did happen. So if I'm understanding the ending correctly, yes, Frau Jad used this kind of third sack technology to access the HTW, the Halean Theoric World, which is, as we kind of established earlier, a higher plane of existence that stretches across the multiverse. So the world of ideas and maths and theories is its own dimension of reality that kind of sits on top of the main timeline. Very confusing, and I don't even know if I'm really explaining it correctly, but that's how I interpreted the ending. That Jad, of course, obviously you were given plenty of hints that he didn't actually die at the end, even though that is the cover story. Jad, I guess, teleported or multidimensional traveled back to the Thousanders door, while Erasmus and the rest of the Mathic world kind of make peace with the cousins, and they come to an understanding. And, that's the other twist that I mentioned earlier, that they are just regular people that are scared of what could happen. They're just trying to survive on their ship. And our reality that we're following is, Erasmus's world is going to be incorporated to the next generation of the ship, and sort of a peace treaty is established. And yeah, that's the ending. And it's just so crazy and so mind-blowing. There's so many concepts, and even just trying to, write the script for this and describe my thoughts of what actually happened, I still don't think I'm really grasped around all the implications of what happened. But it was just such a great ride. If you can really get lost in the stories and the characters and the world that Stephenson's building, you're gonna enjoy this. It is a total world building, character driven story. It's not really plot driven, even though there is a subplot that does get advanced at the end. It's all about the characters, all about the world building, and all about philosophizing about science and technology and realities and math and what does it mean to being reality and what is, is perception reality is kind of a simple way to describe it. Really highly recommend it, with those caveats that if this is your style of book, it's not a fast paced, like a lit RPG. I've, recently read Cradle, which is like an anime book where there's action, fighting. There's hardly any fighting, like I said, till the very end. It's just a short little skirmish when they finally take on the ship. It's all about developing the characters and getting lost in this really imaginative world that Stephenson's created. So personally, I would give this 5 out of 5. It was just, it's one of those books that sticks with you. And that is a hallmark of a great novel, that I'm still thinking about it. I was thinking about it the entire time I was reading it. Another hint for you, if you're watching this in 2024, was good old ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT to be a reading companion that doesn't provide spoilers, but to help me understand what the heck was going on. So I used ChatGPT as kind of a book buddy. So ChatGPT 4 is great at this. It'll not give me spoilers. So I didn't know about, the cousins or what the exact nature of the ship was until I got to that section. But every couple of chapters, every couple of hours, I would inevitably have a question of, what did I just read? What was the telescope? Is that a telescope he's sort of talking about? And ChatGPT was a great, book companion. So maybe I can do a video on that, of how to use ChatGPT as a reading buddy, because when you read like a wiki, for example, like reading Stormlight Archive, it's really easy to read spoilers because everything's so interconnected. But the great thing about a large language model like ChatGPT, it can understand the context and know where you currently are in the story. And you can just tell it to, don't give me any spoilers past where we're currently talking about. And that allowed me to really have, this all knowledgeable buddy read that I could chat with and ask of all these questions I had about the characters, the plot, or what exactly is happening. Why are they in the snow? What's this journey? What happened to get there? And it would help fill me in the gaps in my own understanding while not spoiling it. So easy, like I said, just to wrap this up, it was an easy 5 out of 5 for me, a book that I can't stop thinking about. I really enjoyed Neal Stephenson's Anathem, and I highly recommend it for anyone in the mood for very philosophical, highbrow science fiction fantasy. Thanks for watching this long, lengthy video rambling. I hope it was enjoyable. I hope it was helpful for anyone thinking about or had also recently read Neal Stephenson Anathem themselves. So thanks for watching. Have a great day.